Hi, how you doing? I just have a couple of things going on today. I'm going to go downstairs and transplant the Dusty Miller. I seeded that a couple of weeks ago and it's growing quickly. It's already time to put them into their own individual little cells. So I'm going to get that done. And a little later, I'm going to use up some of last year's frozen produce. I'm going to make some zucchini loaf and I'm going to share my favorite recipe with you. As well, I have a couple of long keeper tomatoes still left from last year. I've been saving them, wondering just how long they're going to last, and I thought we'd cut those open and talk about long keeper tomatoes a little bit. My name is Sharon. I garden on a large yard in a small town in east central Saskatchewan, Zone 3. Welcome to my Sass Garden. Okay, so as I said, I'm going to transplant Dusty Miller that I seeded just a couple weeks ago. They've come along really nicely. And I seeded the Silver Dust, which is this one. And as well, I seeded New Look, which is the one with the fatter leaf. And it's already got a fatter leaf. And that is this one. I've got my tray all ready. I've pre-moistened the soilless mix. This is Pro Mix HP. And I don't sieve it. For those of you who have seen me start seedlings with the Pro Mix HP, I sieve out the big bits, but in this I don't need to. So it's not really heavily rooted just yet. You can see the roots there. Some of them are, but I think they're already pushing their silver leaf, which is now they're coming up to their second set of true leaves. So I think they're going to be just fine to transplant. The HP allows you, the high porosity, HP is high porosity, and it allows you to pull apart those seedlings very easily with no damage. And when you're doing this, you want to make sure that you're grabbing by a leaf and not by the stem, and you're trying to keep as many of the roots intact as you can. So I'm gonna use the biggest ones, and quite honestly I'll probably end up saving the smaller ones because I tend to do that. There's a bunch of small ones, so I'm just going to put those to the side for now and pick off these big ones. Some of these are kind of breaking a little as I go. I think they should be fine. There's two here. That's a wee little one. I'll just put that over there. This is a very nice looking seedling. Right there. That first silver leaf is coming out, but that is the third true leaf now. So it's really good just to kind of break up that clump a little as you're going, just very gently, and then they come apart very easily when you start with breaking apart that bottom bit. Now I don't water them heavily before I do this part. It's good to have it, you know, the soil moist but not really wet. If it were really wet, then they might just take a little bit more to tease apart. These are a bunch of little small ones, so I'm going to put those over here. And all those little ones, of course, will continue to grow. There's a little bit of algae on the top of the soil. I never really worry too much about that. Last year I grew the silver dust, and I grew it both in pots with geraniums, and I grew it in a flower border, in a raised bed flower border on the south side of the house. And it was a pretty hot summer last year overall. They did very well there. They actually loved it there. And just before the end of the season, they were about to start blooming when I pulled them up. And there was an awful lot of foliage. Now, I planted heavy, probably a little heavier than I needed to. But even still, there was an awful lot of foliage in those plants. So I've just poked some holes in here, and I'm just going to poke those seedlings in there. This is the same method you would use for pretty much any seedling. You kind of, when I firm this soil, I just rub on it. I don't pat too hard. I don't pat at all, actually. I just rub in circles all the way around. And then just not a deep hole. You don't really need to go very deep. It depends, of course, on the roots of your plant. But just settle it into there, and they're going to do great. I can't see why they shouldn't. I have this little dibbler, but you could use the end of a pen or the eraser end of a pencil. I have used that on many occasions because my dibblers go missing, and then, a few days later I find them. I do find them beneficial more so than just using my finger. Just tuck those roots in. It actually goes very quickly. I often think that Dusty Miller is also a little bit underused, and, admittedly, I have not used it very much. For no reason other than, I like that big pop of color instead, but the white is very nice. The white leaves are very bright and nice looking, so yeah, they're a useful plant. So I just need 4 more. So I'm going to get some of these little ones. And those they're so tiny. That you don't even need to make a hole. I'm just going to simply go at the edge of the end of the root and just give it a little push into the soil. So there's the plant with the roots, very tiny. I'm just going to lay it down there and just give it a little shove. I don't need to tag these because I'll be able to tell these silver dust have a very cut leaf, and these are going to have a fat leaf that's not cut at all. So same idea. These are rooted much nicer. And so this was, I don't think it should matter. This was last year's seed. This is this year's seed. Can't see that would make a difference, but perhaps. So same thing, I'm going to take the biggest ones. Tease them apart a little, and then the plants will come apart very easily. You just don't want to rip any of the roots off, or try to minimize it. It doesn't hurt most plants to lose a few of their roots. I'm trying to think of some that it does. Well, cucumber and any of the melon family for sure, they don't like to have root disturbance like this. But for flowers, I'm not sure. You know, I've transplanted my share of annuals and perennials. Can't really think of any that resent a bit of root disturbance. So that just comes apart. This one has quite a few all together. So, and their roots are quite intertwined. Just try and get them loosened up a little bit before taking them apart. So I'm taking 2 here, I think. Yeah. And then, so I took the 2 off because that was the easiest. And then take them apart that way. There's another small one. These are about the same. They're just starting to push their silver leaf. And as well, this is the silver leaf is their 3rd true leaf. Here as well. I think that if these were left any longer, it would have become a little more difficult to get them separated, because for such small little plants, they have a fairly decent root structure already. So I'll just get started planting these up and then take apart a few more. I'm excited about these new look ones. I really did fall in love with that Senecio. And the video I did the other day showed that I'm trying to bring some back to life. I put them in with the geraniums to winter in a bag, and I'm trying to bring them back to life. We'll see how they go. It hasn't been too long, and today they don't look a whole lot different than they did the other day when I did them. So nothing to report on there yet. This is one of the reasons why I like to plant in one of these containers and sort of broadcast sow or sow a bunch in one of those containers and then transplant. If I was to do this just into these cells, I might have one very small one. I might have a cell with none germinate. And so this way I have a little bit more control over what's actually getting potted up to grow on. And as well, once this cell, of course I started it on a heat mat, and once this container started to germinate, I was able to take this container and take it off the heat mat, as opposed to, say, you had a few plants growing in here, and then in the next bit of tray you have another different set of plants that have not yet germinated, and you're wondering what to do. You know, these have germinated, you have to get them off the mat. These haven't, and some of these all come apart. These 6 cells of mine all come apart, but some don't. They're all one solid tray, and I think you kind of get caught up in that a little bit, in a little bit of trouble. And I think that it's beneficial to sow this way and then be able to, just like I said, have more control over taking them off the heat, putting them under different lights if you need to, and potting them up. And potting up the ones that you want, as opposed to having to limp along with maybe a weak one. See, this one right here. This germinated. Oh, it's hard to tell. This germinated, but it's a very weak seedling. And so, you know, that's garbage in my opinion. And I don't want it taking up a cell, you know, especially if you're growing just the amount you need or close to that. Super, that's all done. I'm pretty happy with that. And it was kind of just the right amount of seedlings, with the exception of a few of the silver dust left over. I'm just going to give them a bit of a spray. The soil was pre-moistened, and I don't think these plants like very wet conditions. So I'm not going to water them anymore right now. I'm just going to settle them in a bit. And also after transplanting, I like to put on a humidity dome just for maybe 24 to 48 hours, just so that everything I know is, you know, nicely rehydrated again. It just gives them that little boost until, just for, like I said, about 24 to 48 hours. I'll leave it on and then I remove it. The last thing I thought I'd do is pot up this spearmint. It also grew quickly. I feel like I seeded it at the same time as I did the Dusty Miller. I just don't recall, but I feel like it was that. So I've just got a pot of soil going. I'm going to do, you know, pretty much the same thing. And I don't need a lot. So I think I'll pick out maybe 5 to 7 of the nicest seedlings. And I'll toss the rest because I still also have a lot more seed. So just so I don't get errant seedlings, I'm going to do this when I'm breaking them apart. I think I mentioned that I bought a spearmint plant last year and it promptly died shortly after I got it home and put it in full sun. And I now read, when I bought this package, I have read that they prefer a part sun location. So I killed it. I should have looked that up before I actually did something with it, and I didn't. I just, you know, you sort of assume all herbs like full hot sun, and they don't. I have been now informed. Okay, a bunch of small ones. Just going to use the bigger ones. I don't know that they need to be divided, you know, while I'm doing it. I will divide them up. I think you can just take clumps of them, clumps of seedlings, and divide them that way without having to go individually. I think that's good, and I'll just leave the rest of those. Some are half buried. I have a feeling that they will make their way to the top and continue to grow in their quest for world domination. Eventually, this pot is just for while they're in here. Eventually, I will put them into a larger, probably like a 10-inch pot or something like that to grow on. So I'm done down here for today, but right now I'd like to go upstairs and get going on that zucchini bread. The recipe I'm using for the zucchini loaf is, it's called Mom Zucchini Bread, and it's from All Recipes. I'll put a link to the recipe in the description box just below. The first thing we're going to talk about is the zucchini that had been frozen and what it looks like now, and we're just going to drain that first and kind of get that ready. The recipe calls for 2 cups of grated zucchini, and I don't remember how much I originally put into these packages last year when I froze them, but the last time I made this recipe, I drained 2 of these thinking that would be 2 cups of grated zucchini, and it wasn't enough. And so today I've brought up 3 packages and let them thaw. And I just want to show you just how much liquid is in there. So the first thing I'm going to do is just drain off some of it. And you could squeeze these dry. But there is an awful lot of liquid that comes out of that after it's thawed. I'm just going to put the balance in here to drain off while I'm getting everything else ready. And I'm just going to as well press it down a little just to get out all of the liquid. I mean, that's got to be, I should measure it. It's got to be well over a half a cup, close to a cup of liquid that's in there. So I'm just going to press more of the liquid out. While I'm doing this, I just want to say that, you know, some people are always looking to find a home for too much zucchini that they've grown. And this is certainly a great option for just grate it and freeze it and use it up through the winter. Mine always goes to zucchini loaf. It's a good loaf and it freezes well after it's cooled. And so, you know, if you should find yourself with a big overgrown zucchini, just scrape out the center where the seeds might be and grate up the rest, the rind and all, and package it up into plastic bags. Freezes very easily. So you'll preheat the oven to 325 or convect 300. And as well, you'll want to get your pans. The recipe makes 2 full-size loaf pans, but we like these mini loaf pans instead. It's just better for us to just have one small loaf at a time to thaw that instead of getting through a large size loaf. You're going to start off with 3 cups of flour, a tablespoon of cinnamon, and then a teaspoon each of baking soda, baking powder, and salt. And then that just gets whisked together. I never sift it together. I don't think that really, I don't even know if the recipe calls for that, but I don't think that's really necessary in this type of recipe. There's that. Then for the liquid, it calls to start with, in a separate bowl, 2 1/4 cups of sugar, a cup of vegetable oil, and 3 eggs. Now I have made this recipe egg-free, and that uses, you can use a bit of applesauce in here for an egg substitute, as well as ground flax and water. I can't remember the exact, it's easy, you just need to Google that. It's like 2 tablespoons of ground flax and a tablespoon or 2 tablespoons of water, something like that. And that makes a nice substitute for, egg-free substitute for this. Because of the consistency and the flavor of this, you don't taste the difference, and it makes no difference in texture. So you just whisk that up. It also calls for a tablespoon of vanilla, plus a bit. That's my bit. It doesn't call for an extra bit, but I like to always put in a little bit extra. and the grated zucchini. It doesn't need to be dry, but you don't want to have all that excess water. There is still quite a bit of juice that came off. And we're just gonna zip that together. And then I'm gonna add the wet to the dry, mix it up a little, then add in a cup of chopped walnuts. I put a little bit extra of the chopped walnuts. If you like, I imagine you could put chocolate chips. I know some people like chocolate chips in their zucchini bread. I'm not a fan of that, but I can't see why you couldn't substitute chocolate chips, or instead of walnuts, you could use pecans or some other nut that you like. So I just mix it to about that, where I'm still seeing flour. Add in the chopped walnuts, and then mix it up. And that's it. You know, it comes together so fast. And it takes a little bit of time to bake. You'd want to count on probably about 45 minutes to bake. But within an hour, you're going to have baked zucchini loaf. I should mention, the pan that I prepared, I sprayed a cooking spray, and then I just line it just this way with parchment as well, and that's just to ease of pulling it out. This recipe will fill up these loaf pans quite well, but it doesn't overflow them. So they're ready for the oven. I like to bake them at convection 300 for 30 minutes. Then I pull them out and I turn them around, and for about the last 10 minutes, I go regular 350, and that gives it a nice browning on top as well as finishes it cooking at that point. So I'll just show you the end product when they're done in a minute. So for the past few years, I've been growing a tomato called Longkeeper, and that is exactly what it sounds like. They grow through the summer. When you pick them, they are still not quite ripe, although some are going to be starting to ripe. They begin to blush a little on the plant. And pick them, and I put them on a shelf in the basement, which is usually around 15-16 degrees Celsius. And I just leave them on a shelf, actually on my grow light stand, which has no plants at that time, nor are the lights on. And so I just leave them on that shelf. And then they just slowly ripen through the next few months. I generally use up the majority of them by Christmas, but I think they were a little later this year. And then I just had these two left over. They're not big ones. I had a third one that I actually harvested or took seeds out of it. But so this is now, I'm going to say I harvested them sometime in August. So that's 5 or 6 months ago now that these were harvested, and there's certainly no sign of rot or anything wrong with them. I think that this one feels kind of soft, like it's starting to dry inside. So we'll just cut that one first. It doesn't look too bad. Some of these seeds, you know, sometimes you get a tomato in the store and it looks like they've started growing from the inside, and that's exactly what some of these seeds have started to look like. They've actually begun to germinate. So I feel like this without the seeds would still be edible, although there's not much there now. There's very little in terms of, you know, meaty tomato. There's seeds and there's skin, and that skin is kind of a little bit leathery. But, you know, for a small tomato, they usually don't last quite like that. So not too bad. And then this is the bigger one that is in better shape. Those seeds aren't looking wonky at all. The The core is fine. And I think these, I'm not sure that it would be good for, you know, a tomato sandwich. Maybe, I'm not sure. But they'd certainly be good for soup or adding to like a chili or some tomato-based recipe. There are several kinds of lawn keepers. I got my seed in a trade, and they were just simply called lawn keeper. And so I don't know if they ever did have a name at one point. There is a website called tatianastomatobase.com where she lists 23 varieties of lawn keeper. The only other one that I've heard of is Ruby Treasure. And that one is, that's actually sold by Prairie Garden Seeds in Saskatchewan. They have a website as well. So when you're looking for them in the catalog, somewhere in the description is going to say lawn keeper. And you know, they're no trouble to grow. Mine that I have is quite prolific on one plant. One year I grew 2 plants thinking that I'd like more tomatoes, and I landed up having to blanch or peel and freeze a whole bunch of them because I had too many of them. So they are nice to grow, I think, and have that fresh tomato all the way through to Christmas or longer. I know some tomatoes will last that long. Some of the plum tomatoes or the paste tomatoes in particular have a very long shelf life as well. I'll be trying that this year with the Plum Regal tomato, and I'm not going to grow the lawn keeper this year, mostly because I just want to grow 6 tomatoes, and I'd like to grow something different this year as well. The zucchini loaf is ready. Let's take a look. There they are, browned up nicely, risen decently. They don't get, like I said, they don't get really high. I'd say about another maybe 25 to 30% of the volume that you put in there. So they've cooled sufficiently. I find it beneficial to leave them in the pan until they've cooled somewhat. So just going to get them out. And I find that that's why I put the parchment in there, is because it's just so much easier to get them out, even if it's just something for lifting. And so I just thought I'd see what that weight is. Each one, this one weighs 397 grams. I'm sure they're all about that 400 gram, 420, yeah. So they're all around that weight. And I'll just cut one up, show you what it looks like inside. They're nice and moist, and the top is nice and crunchy. So there is the inside with the nuts and all that good zucchini. Yum, yum. And of course you can really smell the cinnamon. It smells wonderful. Taste test. It's delicious. Unless you're allergic. I wouldn't leave out the walnuts because they really add a little bit of a nice flavor as well. To freeze them, I just package each one. I just wrap each one in cling wrap individually, and then I put those in a plastic bag, and they freeze and thaw beautifully without any trouble at all. Be sure to take a look at the recipe that I link in the comments below, or in the description box below rather, and give it a try. If someone is giving you zucchini next year, even if you don't grow it, or if you have too many from your garden, be sure to grate some up and put it in the freezer for a day like today when you just feel like having some zucchini loaf. Thanks very much for hanging out with me today. My tasks are done. It's time for me to sit down with a cup of coffee and maybe another piece of that zucchini loaf. I hope you enjoyed the video today. If you did, consider giving me a thumbs up. Tell your friends, and if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button. Thanks again. See you.